Hey everyone, Yan Zhao. Tonight, special guest Mike Murphy, also known as Chibi Mike in certain places. He's here to talk about his newest campaign, Longshadow, and the pulp revolution of the 20th century.
Yeah, let's do it, man.
All right. So, just to get a little background, this isn't your first online campaign.
No.
Several. Um, so, what made you say at this point in time, now's my chance to get into the comic industry?
Well, it's something that my wife and I, prior to the whole indie CG scene, that we'd been working towards for almost a decade at that point.
Oh,
Um, we were originally from Chicago. We met at the American Academy of Art. It's the school where like the Mortal Kombat guys and
mhm.
Alex Ross went. Um, so we met there, and we decided a little bit after we finished that we were going to head out to the West Coast and just do our best to try to take over the world, because that's what you do when you're really young and naive. Um, so we kind of worked for the better part of a decade. We worked freelance. We still work freelance. We have a list of clients that we do stuff for. But when we were on the fringes of the mainstream comic industry, we were doing flats, lettering. We were submitting pitches to any publisher that would listen to us, and that was just kind of our life for the better part of 10 years. And you know um, I always tell the story about IDW and how they set up a satellite office here, and how the we had a meeting, and the entire experience was such a turnoff. And that night, we were watching a stream. It was one of Ethan's early streams, and everyone's just like having a good time, and there's this sense of camaraderie, and it's everything that I wished mainstream comics was but wasn't, like, especially once you learn how the hot dogs are made.
Yeah.
And like, I just had that moment of like, what are you doing? Like, you're trying to get into a party that doesn't want you. So we had a good long talk about it, because we knew what it would mean to step away from the mainstream. But we decided on it, and we haven't looked back since, man.
Awesome. So, I think this is your third or fourth campaign.
Technically, yeah, technically fourth. We've had leftover campaigns.
Okay.
We had a leftover for Samurai and Dinosaurs, and we have an active first printing leftover for The Gods Fear Me.
Mhm.
But yeah, in terms of just new projects, this would be project number four.
Okay. So, starting from the fringes of what one could consider mainstream industry,
Yeah.
you being your own indie creators, what would you say the big lesson uh, has been in the last few years? Like, what's the big takeaway?
Um, the big takeaway is, I think we made the right decision. I've made no bones about Long Shadow on Twitter and social media in general. Like, it's an uphill climb, because I know that for a lot of people in the scene, comics is what they want and nothing else. And the idea of trying to sell basically an illustrated novel is a tough sell for some people. But even going through what we're going through right now, I wouldn't change anything. We went from struggling to keep the lights on and taking any job that would come our way, to clearing between 10 and 15,000 per project, and
Nice.
growing our audience little by little.
Yeah, it seems to me that that's the big thing is what a lot of the new people don't quite understand is, the people who've been in it a little bit, not everyone's an Ethan Van Sciver, not everyone's a your boy Zach, but the people who stick it out and can, consistently put out projects, they're
Right.
the ones who you can see really building an audience.
Hmm. Yeah, we're in this for the long haul. You know, unfortunately, we've seen people come and go over the past 3 or 4 years now. But you know, as long as there's an audience, as long as they're receptive to what we're doing, and as long as we can keep growing that audience, this is the rest of our lives. You know, like Malin calls it the 5-year plan, and if that's the case, we're on year 3 or 4 at this point. And yeah, I mean, I think the ones that drop out after one project, whether it, you know, funds or fails, the ones that drop out are the ones that are expecting EVS levels of, you know, notoriety, or expecting attention or help from, you know, from those guys. And I mean, I'm grateful for the help that I've gotten from them. You know, like Malin did a cover for us. Ethan has promoted our everything from Samurai to Deepwell. Um, you know, I'm grateful for their help. I'm grateful for their support. But even if that wasn't there, I'd still be here, you know, making and promoting books.
So we have an early question from the Dungeon Delver. Is American manga even a thing? I cringe when I see or hear that term. I think it's done by people trying to hitch their start to manga's popularity. Your thoughts on that?
No, it's complicated. So I don't think American manga is a thing. I think if we accept that manga is comics created by Japanese creators over in Japan for a Japanese audience, and it's kind of bled over into America, then that is what it is. You can't just be like, I mean, to use the food analogy, like we always use the hot dog vendor analogy.
Uh-huh.
You can't just be like, I make teriyaki chicken with rice, so it's American teriyaki chicken with rice now. It doesn't work that way. But that being said, I mean, we're heading into like the 20th or even the 30th year of manga being a thing in America. You know, I remember as a kid buying Golgo 13 reprints in the dollar store, and that was in like the late 80s, early 90s. So I think it's kind of culturally accepted at this point, and if America is a melting pot, you know, there's certainly art and books that could be influenced by manga, but I don't think you have to go so far as to call it American manga.
It's interesting. Yeah, I can definitely see your point. I don't know. In some ways, to me, it's a distinct style separate from what we think of as comic books. I think those are both sequential art,
Sure.
but they're you know, very distinct genres, basically.
Yes. Yeah. And not even genres. Like it, you know, there's a breakdown in the storytelling approach, the pacing approach, the characterization approach, the language difference, you know, like
Sure.
it's, you know, at the end of the day, like for me personally, I just consider it all comics. But yeah, it's, you know, it's an experience that I don't think you could replicate, and any more than you could set out to recreate, you know, a European or a French style film, you know, with an American crew. Like it just wouldn't be the same thing.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and to me, that's most of the problem. I don't know if I quite go that far and say that you couldn't, but you'd really have to understand what the Japanese people are doing in the beginning. Like you would have to understand those differences in story structures, and you know, why do they draw things the way that they draw them? But that, to me, that's why most American manga tends to fail. Now, there are some things like Ben Dunn, you know, Ninja Classroom,
right,
or Ninja High School. I mean, you know, and some of those guys, well, Kyung Lee, for example, you know, if they're not manga, they're pretty close.
Yeah, and that's where like the entire, you know, like I said, at the end of the day, I just call everything comics. Like that's where like no matter how secure a house of cards you think you've built up in your head for like what is and isn't for whatever you're talking about, like someone like Kyung or even, you know, Selena, my wife, comes along and it's like, nope, because, you know, like Selena's influenced primarily by manga and the Archie studio.
Oh yeah.
So it's like I can't say to someone like her or Kyung or whoever, Adam Warren, I can't say to someone like that who's dedicated their entire life to a particular format within the medium, well, that doesn't count. I can't say that to them.
So getting back to pulp for a
Yeah.
minute here. So you had mentioned that Longshadow
Mhm.
is an illustrated. You call it illustrated novel, I believe.
Yeah, basically. That's what the pulps were. I mean, they started off in magazines. Some of them were printed up as mini novels, but for the most part, they were just strictly run in magazines.
So I think and you'd mentioned in some ways it's a hard sell. So can you describe for everyone when you say illustrated novel, what
Sure.
exactly do you mean? Is it like one illustration for every page? Is it like an illustration at the beginning of a chapter, or how does it work?
Sure. So we're going to have illustrations to start off most chapters, and there will be 1 to 2 illustrations throughout the chapters. And the chapters are shorter than traditional full-length novel chapters would be. They can range anywhere from 4 pages to 8 to 12 at most. They're shorter and more condensed than a traditional novel because the overall experience is meant to be consumed way faster than a traditional novel.
Um, and so when you were cooking up Long Shadow,
Mhm.
how much did those old timey pulps really influence you with the idea and the feel?
Oh, huge, man. There's obviously the Conan inspiration, with setting it in a high fantasy setting, which just generally means like tons of action, adventure, and there is magic, but there's a lower emphasis on magic than like more traditional fantasy. Um, so it was a huge influence. Everything from Conan to the Shadow, because there's kind of a mystery angle and a noir angle to Long Shadow. He is an ogre detective for hire. So it's kind of this noir story in a fantasy setting, starring a 7 foot tall ogre.
Uh, and out of curiosity, how did you come up with the idea of the ogre should be the detective? Because if I'm thinking fantasy races, you got to have some high intelligence to do some Sherlock Holmesing, and ogres aren't high on that list.
Yeah, yeah. Well, so the like real quick, the backstory with Long Shadow is be it tabletop, be it like a JRPG or a traditional video game RPG like the Elder Scroll series or whatever. Whenever there's a character creation section in an RPG, for like 10 plus years now, I've always played as Long Shadow.
Okay.
So like yeah, especially Elder Scrolls, like all the like since Morrowind, Long Shadow's been my guy. I've had to play as an orc because they don't have an ogre class. But it's been Long Shadow, so he's been a guy that's existed in my head for a long, long time now. And
Okay.
the backstory with Long Shadow is he's kind of the black sheep of his clan. He is more intelligent than your average ogre, and it's a situation where he saw his future prospects. He saw I could hide out in a dungeon and eat the random adventurer. I could live under a cave. I could be out in the woods and just eat wildlife and whatever. Like he saw the traditional life laid out for him, and he decided to branch away from that and try to enter the world of man.
Interesting. So then, are you talking about like tabletop RPGs that you played him in as
Yeah,
well? Yeah.
yeah, man. Throughout high school, I was in like 3 different D&D campaigns. Played a little bit in college, and then between being in a band through high school and college and then trying to break into comics, like out of all my hobbies and interests, one of them had to go, and it ended up being like traditional RPGs.
Yeah, that's what usually happens.
Yeah.
You can hang out all night in a dorm or somebody's apartment phase of your life.
Right, exactly. And there are no consequences.
So then, with Longshadow specifically, since you have already played him, essentially you have been this character to you've lived in this guy's shoes, basically.
Yeah.
Has that changed your writing process? Has it made it easier, or do you think more natural than other projects?
Sure. I'd say yeah. Like I've never had to put much thought into that, but yeah, be it with Samurai or The Gods Fear Me or Deepwell or what we've got coming up with the Red Key, there is this process of getting to know the characters and building them up from scratch. Whereas the most amount of work that I had to put into Longshadow was building up his world, since it had to be unique and separate to itself. Like I couldn't just literally drop him into like a D&D landscape,
Right.
So yeah, like the work went into the world building as opposed to the character building, because I was like, oh, I know that guy. He's like 20% the Shadow, 10% Conan, and just on and on and on. Like I'd say about 40% Hellboy. He's got like a real workman thing to him.
Cool. So the Dungeon Delver says, my wife's writing resources are rife with how to turn your TTRPG character into a novel workshop.
I feel like it's a grand tradition, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, why not? Because first of all, you should write what you know.
Right.
And if you've lived this character for so many years, and then, to me, it makes it a lot easier to write them, because you would know how this person reacts to like the snooty waitress at the tavern. You would know how he reacts to someone trying to lowball him when he's trading in some goods or whatnot. So it to me, it makes dialogue especially a lot easier, because you know this person's voice.
Exactly. Yeah. 100%. It's been fun. Like one of the reasons I felt comfortable launching when we did is this just kind of became a side project for me last year while we were working out the kinks with some of our other projects. And since I knew him so well, once I had the plot kind of solidified in my head, the pages just kind of started falling out, because I knew everything about Longshadow and how he would react to X, Y, and Z.
And so going back to the story a little bit.
Sure.
You mentioned here. Wait a minute. Okay, so getting back to pulps. Prior to comic, pulp novels and magazines were extremely popular and helped us usher in the modern age of storytelling.
Yeah.
A character from Superman to Witcher can be traced back to pulps, which were filled with un-PC action, adventure, and violence.
Yeah.
Which is definitely true. So how much un-PC action, adventure, and violence are we going to see in Longshadow?
It's pretty bloody. I for those who have backed Deepwell from us, thanks for your patience. We're getting that out soon. But I thought Deepwell was going to be like the most over the top in terms of content, because Deepwell is basically a rated R HBO show on paper. So I thought that was as far as like I was going to push content in our stuff, but no, there's some heinous stuff that goes down in Longshadow. It's very much an adult story.
Okay. I can see two un-PC things right here.
Very much so.
But it seems like it really does go a bit further into, a lot of what pulps really had, especially, in the early 20th century, before they started censoring books a bit more.
Yeah, I mean, like pulps pulps were kind of on the decline once comics started taking over, but then once you had comics, you had the comics board and Wortham and all that stuff, that whole mess. But yeah, like I know it's kind of a divisive topic, but like there's this quote from Frank Miller, like he said in some interview, comic book creators are outlaws. I want us to be outlaws.
Mhm.
And I kind of agree with that sentiment. I like the idea of pulps and the early decades of comics and then independent comics throughout the 80s and 90s. I like this through line of just it's the stuff that you don't want your parents to know you're reading.
That's true. PGC says, have ogres always been regarded as bronze over brain? I would hazard to offer that it's actually not the case. For
Mhm.
instance, Japanese folklore have ogres, oni, and they're quite smart.
That is an excellent point, and I'd love to get more into that. But like, there is going to be some Eastern mythology stuff folded in. Should we get
Oh,
to do more than one novel?
interesting.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah, I think, yeah, I think part of it has to do with, what period in history you're looking at the legends,
Hmm.
because there's certainly certain eras that you can go back in history where there are people or creatures who are extra large and brawny, and they're not stupid. They're actually quite smart. And it
Right.
seems to, go in and out with fashion.
Hmm. Yeah, definitely, man. Yeah, it's as far as like challenging stereotypes and kind of like thinking outside uh, traditional roles and archetypes. Longshadow was something that I definitely wanted to push and play with. And it's kind of that forgive the analogy, but it's all I can think of off the top of my head. It's the whole Ratatouille thing of like his clan is like, what are you doing? It, and he's the one that's just not happy with his life.
So, out of curiosity, initially when we
Mhm.
start the story, do not his clan, but do the other people in the world take him seriously as someone who has brains, or is everyone kind of like, oh, this guy?
Sure. So he's when we come into the story, he's been in the world of man for 8 to 10 years at this point.
Okay.
Um, so he's kind of developed a reputation across the kingdom of Elos.
Mhm.
Um, Most humans in most towns and provinces know about him. But yeah, again, to push the whole like shadow Batman thing, like he's kind of an urban legend, like, because like how much work can one guy do by himself?
Yeah.
So, he's people know about him, but however, the one place where he's kind of made a home for himself and the people have taken him in is the town of Amberglass, or the town of Colon Brick, and he does most of his work out of Amberglass, which is a tavern in Colon Brick.
Ah, interesting. Yeah, and that makes sense too, since back in the day, there's no TV, there's no photographs.
Right.
So how would you know what somebody looks like? So it definitely makes sense that he becomes sort of an urban legend, especially in the surrounding areas.
Right. Yeah. I mean, like, so Elos roughly is the size of Australia, maybe a little bit bigger. And
Oh,
so you figure like that size landmass, like one person just traveling around and doing odd jobs over the course of a decade. I mean, there's only so many people that are going to know that he even exists.
yeah, yeah. Interesting. Uh, so let's take a look real quick. What you have for tier levels?
Yeah, sure.
So the featured, the swag bag.
Hmm. So
Uh,
yeah, with the swag bag, you're going to be getting a copy of the book. We're going to be doing a prequel novella like we do with all of our releases. The prequel novella is A Murder in Amberglass, and it's about the first night that Longshadow arrives in Colon Brick, and there's a murder at the tavern, And of course, because hey, there's this 7 foot tall ogre that just rode into town, everyone thinks that he did it, and so it's this closed door mystery where he has to prove his innocence and solve the crime at the same time. So
Very
you're with that, you're also going to be getting a trading card. You're going to be getting a print of the map, which is the thumbnail. You're going to be getting a sticker, and you're also going to be getting a mini print of the cover.
Of this cover here, the yellow one. Okay, very cool. So I see you've got a digital edition.
Yeah, it's I wasn't, and I said this with Deepwell too. I wasn't going to do digital, but I always get like a handful of people asking, but then only 1 or 2 people actually buy it. So I don't know. Maybe like next time around is when I'll put my foot down and won't do it. But for now, we added it.
Yeah, I mean the only problem when that happens is like that's the time you get a bunch of Europeans or Australians who really want to buy it, and they're like, that shipping cost is so much.
Right.
All right, so the main cover book, which is just the book by itself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, just the book by itself. It's listed as main cover because in the next, call it, week or so, we're going to be adding our alternate cover by Preston Acevedo. Preston does the alternate covers for all of our campaigns, and this one will be no different.
Awesome. And then you also have the digital pack where people could buy all your previous books, I believe, right?
Yeah, that's correct. So in addition to Longshadow, you'll be getting The Gods Fear Me and Samurai and Dinosaurs. And, then when we head into the leftover campaign for Deepwell, the chibi pack in that will have all 3 of these plus, Deepwell. Each campaign, we just like adding another book to the stack.
Oh, that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
So you also have the chibi pack where people can pick up
physical
the
copies.
3 books as well.
Yeah.
All right. They meet original art.
Yeah, so Jeff Lasley, he's not just our cover artist; he's also doing the spot illustrations for the actual book. And so, there's always got to be a femme fatale, right? If you're telling a noir story.
Yeah.
And our femme fatale is called Redlocks, and Longshadow gets back after an assignment, and he's kind of decompressing, and that's when all of a sudden, out of nowhere, Redlocks appears to him and threatens his life while at the same time offering him a job. And so this is that moment. It'll be in the book itself, and I love it. It's such a solid illustration.
It's great. So I take it the sword is magic.
Yep.
Does this, but it's got a very interesting design. Does this figure into the story?
Yeah, heavily. Redlocks is going to be a character that, again, assuming we get to do more than 1 volume, Redlocks is going to be a character that grows and evolves over the planned 9 volumes.
Mm-hmm.
And the main teaser I put out there for people is you have to ask if the sword is hers or she belongs to the sword.
Oh, interesting. All right, so then we've got 2 out of 8 premium swags.
Sure. Yeah, I'm listing them every couple days. Basically, I'm going to be... So the premium swag is everything included with the swag bag, plus you're going to be getting the original character designs drawn by me for each of the major supporting characters.
Very cool. So basically same thing, but with this character of Rinsmore for the other one.
Yeah, Rinsmore, to use like the 007 analogy, Rinsmore is kind of Longshadow's Q.
Interesting.
Yeah.
He seems rather barky.
He is. I was on another stream a couple nights ago, and we were having a conversation about this. He's like, he's somewhere between an Ent and Swamp Thing, and there's a little bit of Alan Moore mixed in there.
Cool.
Yeah.
All right. So then we have prequel novella original art. So this is just the art itself, not the art plus the book.
Well, all the original art tiers are going to include a copy of the book.
Oh, okay. Oh,
Yeah.
that's good for people to know.
Yeah. So yeah, you'll be getting, a copy of the book plus the original art for the novella cover.
Okay. And then one more for the main cover original art.
Yeah. Jeff sent this to me in the mail a couple days ago, and it's gorgeous in person.
And what's the size of the original art?
It's somewhere between 8.5 by 11 and 11 by 17. Like it's
okay.
Yeah, I forgot the strict measurement of it, but we needed it to be proportionate to 5.5 by 7.5 because it's going to be paperback sized.
Right.
So yeah, like I don't have the exact measurements on me, but it's a little bit smaller than 11 by 17.
Okay. So still pretty decent size, but
Yeah.
you're not gonna have to get rid of all your wall decorations to fit it on.
No, it'll fit comfortably in a decent sized frame, and it'll look great on the wall.
Okay. And so about how long is this illustrated novel?
Yeah, it's going to be 112 pages total, and that's including illustrations.
Very cool. Well, BGC seems to like it.
Awesome.
As she's sky clad.
Yeah, because again, when we're talking pulp, like you immediately go to like those classic covers and like all the work that Frazetta did throughout his career. I had to, as a writer, come up with a justification for her being nude a decent amount of time, and she has the ability to teleport via the sword, but the sword makes its demands, and so like she can't take her clothes with her.
That's interesting.
Yeah. Oh no, I'm there with you, BGC.
All right. So you mentioned that you've got 9 planned novels. Are these like it's all not that it's written per se, but you the whole storyline planned out?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. So basically, like I had the epiphany at a certain point that I knew who Longshadow was and I wanted to tell a story with him. And are you familiar with the video game series Fable?
Familiar with it, yeah.
Okay. Well, the developer kind of got swallowed up by Microsoft, and eventually, after the 3rd game, the entire series got shelved. I heard they're trying to do something new with it, but like back when I was a game reviewer, I had this thing where I saw a very clear path for what Fable could do as a franchise to stay relevant and actually at the same time do something new and innovative when it came to like growing and evolving a fantasy setting.
Mm-hmm.
And I really liked that concept that I came up with, and at a certain point I'm like, well, I should just translate this into my own world and drop Longshadow into the middle of it and see what happens. So yeah, roughly the entire thing's planned out.
Very cool. So do you have any plans in the future to take parts of this world into the RPG space? Are you thinking of making games out of any of it, or?
I'd love to, man. Like right now we're just building the audience. Again, I know that it may be a tough sell, but the audience has never let us down. Like I thought, Deepwell was going to have a hard time. We found our audience for Deepwell. Right now, I just want to focus on the books, but sure, if we get to the point where like we're at book 3 or so, and again we can continue to grow the audience, I'd love to bring this into the RPG space. Like I'd kill for a Longshadow miniature on my table.
That would be pretty cool.
It would.
So do you think one of the interesting things to me is we seem to be at kind of an interesting point in comic history, I guess you'd say. The big two, they're still there. They're not going anywhere, but they are floundering a lot. They don't really seem to have the cultural power, the cultural force that they did in the day, and they're just sort of riding the coattails of what came before. And every genre or medium like undergoes change at certain times, especially when whoever's strong just starts to crumble. Do you see this as a time for experimentation? So yeah, probably a lot of the people who are used to buying your stuff are used to more of a traditional comic format. But do you think like now is the time to strike out and more like pulps we could see a reemergence, or other hybrid genres perhaps?
That's my hope, at least. Especially because I'm a publisher, and this is technically our fourth book, and it's something that we're taking very seriously and would like to grow economically. Yeah, man, like we're at a really interesting point, and I don't want to say that we need to go back to square one, but I don't know, maybe a part of that sentiment at least, because I think if there is room for experimentation, then there is room to remind people like, hey, their comics are great. I've dedicated my life to them. That's, I'd say, 95% of what we're going to publish for the rest of our lives. But there are these other mediums out there, and pulp is its own medium. And without pulp, we wouldn't have, as I say in the pitch, like we wouldn't have modern stuff like The Witcher, like Hellboy, like most of what Dark Horse publishes, and we wouldn't have the entire superhero genre. So I hope that there's room for that stuff, and I'd love to see more of it. I'm starting to see people, uh, experiment more with traditional publishing. You had Red Gaze with Sunsworn, which was actually the response to Sunsworn was what gave me the confidence to go with Longshadow. I know Razor Fist published a pulp novel last year. Like it it seems like people want something new and creators want to do something new, but we all don't necessarily know exactly what that new thing is.
Yeah.
But as far as comics go, I think it's easy to solve that problem. Like, just create something in comics that's entertaining, and you'll succeed over Marvel and DC. Because, and like, I think we're starting to see like what's happening with Marvel and DC. I think we're starting to see play out in stuff like Star Wars and Star Trek, where they just kind of have to, besides all the like socio-political stuff that they're injecting, like besides that stuff, they just kind of have to keep rearranging the chairs on the deck of the Titanic, because they're not going to create new IP. They're not going to create new characters. It's just like, hey, here's a slight variation. Here's some of these characters that you haven't seen in live action. Now they're live action. Isn't that new and innovative? And it's like, no, it's not. You're doing what Marvel and DC is doing, because you're kind of at this weird standstill in publishing history.
Yeah, I think so too. And I think, but a lot of the comic book industry really started going downhill in the 80s, even though that was a real high point for comics. You saw all the genres except for capes and cowls just sort of get snuffed out one by one. Right. By the 90s, all you had was capes and cowls. Right. So the people who liked Westerns and history and even romance, there were women who bought all sorts of comics aimed at women. They all just sort of disappeared from the readership. And I think that's one of the reasons why manga is, eating American comics lunch, is because they have those kind of stories. That audience never really went away. There was just nothing for them to spend their money on.
Yeah, I was totally going to dovetail this back into manga. You're absolutely right. That's why the Japanese are just, beating our butts. Like, but like, again, I have to wonder if it's a cultural thing, because like the argument with manga is always like, well, there's something for everybody. Like if you're into baseball, there's a manga about baseball. If you're into like in novellas and soaps, like there's that stuff for that type of woman out there. But if publishers just made content like that for an American audience, I don't know that it would translate. And the cynic in me worries that it's just a thing of like, there's a lot of Americans out there that just don't like reading.
Well, I think that's true, but part of it is, they didn't grow up reading.
Right.
We're forced in general in schools, we're forced to read books that are not interesting.
Right.
To most young people. I would say that there was a bit of a revitalization with the Harry Potter generation.
Sure.
They at least had some books that were interesting.
Mhm.
But, part of it is the whole industry in and of itself needs to push out these things to kids. And I don't know if that means, having some lost leaders, which are free products that you're giving out to school at scholastic fairs,
Mhm.
whatnot. But, we need to get that back. Pulps were great because they were cheap, because the material that they were made on, they generally didn't pay people that well.
Right.
And it was ubiquitous everywhere you go. There were newsstands on every corner, small, convenience type stores, gas stations. Everywhere you go, they would have it. And, we need some way to get it out into the culture more. I don't know how you do that. I don't know how you do it with like Netflix and other stuff like that. But that's what needs to happen.
I see that, and I like it's a tough thing to figure out, because in theory, I love Marvel and DC. I love those characters. They obviously inspired and meant everything to me growing up. But even by the time like I was growing up, and like our generation, like they were old characters.
Yeah.
And I don't think the answer is going to be, DC putting out like an all ages Superman book. I think the comic stuff that is appealing to kids is, like what your boy says all the time, like Dogman and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think, especially from Marvel and DC, with all the money invested with, their corporate entities above them, I just don't think you're going to see too many new IPs out of them, let alone IPs strictly aimed at like a child audience. So
No.
I think if there's going to be a solution to this, it's going to have to come, in part at least, from the independent space.
I think so. One thing I'm already kind of seeing a little bit is that the independent space is sort of like college radio of the 80s, 90s.
Mm-hmm.
And, a lot of the bands that were on college radio were not the ones that made it big.
Right.
They influenced the ones that did. And I could sort of see a little bit of influence starting to happen with types of stories, especially not necessarily at Marvel or DC, but at some of the other smaller publishers.
Yeah, man, I agree. It's been, kind of working at the grassroots level has kind of been the story of my entire life. Being in a punk band through high school and college, and kind of like earning our audience one person at a time. It's something that I'm used to. And when I saw what was happening with CG and independent publishing, I was like, okay, that's where I want to be. I don't want to keep trying to get into the party that doesn't want to let me in. And even if they let me in, they wouldn't be able to pay me a decent wage anyway. So what am I doing?
Yeah. All right. Well, let's check out a couple more comments here. The Dungeon Delver, make it old school. That's in relationship to making the role-playing portion of it.
Right.
VGC, Fable was brilliant, and God, I hope the studios will revisit it.
Oh, well, yeah, and thank you. Thanks for the Kind words, BGC. Yeah, like I really dug Fable, and I I mean, if I said my idea, like it would just like spoil the entire nine volumes. But like, trust me, like there's stuff that happens in more contemporary British Fable, pardon the pun, Fable fantasy stuff that I think is appealing to me more so than like what's coming out of like the more traditional American publishing space when it comes to fantasy and whatnot.
Well, Mike, I know you got to run. So any last thoughts?
Yeah, and like if you wanted to go a couple minutes, like my other show just got delayed by 20 minutes, so I'm good for about
Okay.
another 10 if you want.
All right.
But yeah,
Feedback though, it
coming from me.
might be. Try muting your mic just for a second. All right. Is there any feedback now? Okay, so yeah, I think it is coming from you somewhere. I'm not quite sure why it started like in the middle of the stream, but
That's weird. So it's coming from me.
I think so.
Okay. That's weird. Does that help at all or no?
Let's see. Yeah, I think that did it.
Okay, cool.
All right. So where were we? Let's see here. Oh no, wait, I hear it a little bit.
Uh-oh.
Well, it's better.
Okay. Yeah, sorry about that. I'm not sure what. Yeah, that's weird that it's happening right in the middle of the stream.
All right. So what were I assume that you've read some of these old pulps. What were some of your favorites?
Yeah, basically growing up, my dad was a huge nerd, and he had an entire wall of the reprints, the pulp reprints that they did through the 70s and 80s. So it was kind of up, especially when I was a kid, it was kind of up to his discretion what he would actually let me read. But like in terms of the more superhero leaning stuff, Doc Savage and the Shadow were my dudes. And what little Conan stuff I could read, I was really into. And Lovecraft and stuff like that came later. I'd say it was mainly those three, like Doc Savage, the Shadow, and Conan.
So you like more of the series as opposed to like the one-off stories?
Yeah. I mean, like what was neat about those reprints is you went into them thinking that they were like self-contained books, and then you learn as an adult like, oh, like most of these are just kind of like each chapter was an installment in a magazine, and like it would update like weekly or monthly or whatever the schedule was for that particular book. So I'd go into like one of these books and get an entire experience and think that it was this self-contained thing, and it's only like after the fact that you learn like, oh, this was something that people experienced over like weeks and months.
And are there any pulps today? I mean, I remember buying some either in the late 90s or early 2000s, but I can't think of any that are still running.
No, I mean, it's kind of a dead format, like those bigger characters, like the Doc Savages of the world and the Shadow, like you've got Dynamite for the most part trying to like keep them going through comics, but except for the stuff, especially with the Shadow, like except for the stuff by like Mike Kaluta in the late 70s and early 80s, I don't think, I won't say it can't be done, but I think it's a tough job to get some of those characters to translate into other mediums.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, part of it is just the cultural mores of the time,
right?
Completely different. Even without getting super PC on stuff. Just some of the things just seem odd. Like, well, if you've ever read Lovecraft, you read some of it and you're like, oh, Jesus.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
I've been reading through his works. I got a complete collection of it.
Mm-hmm.
And, I read a story last night where he calls a guy from Mexico a greaser. It's like, ooh, damn.
Yeah.
So I can see that being tough, in some ways. But do you think, not that we necessarily need to scrap everything, but to me, it seems like, most of these IPs that these companies are banking on, they just don't even seem worth the money at this point. Because part of the problem with like the Shadow, Sky Captain, even Doc Savage is very few people remember them. So they don't have an emotional connection to them anymore.
Right.
Wouldn't it be better just to start over from ground zero? And yeah, there's going to be a lot of misses in there, but it seems like you got to build maybe some of the same themes, but with new characters that are more relatable to a modern audience.
Yeah, I think for the most part I agree with you. Like I was saying about the mainstream corporate superhero characters. At a certain point, the audience just aging out isn't the right term, but it's just not relevant to their generation. And
yeah.
If I'm being intellectually honest, if I'm saying that about, Marvel and DC characters, I of course have to apply that to the pulps.
Sure.
So yeah, I think there's always going to be companies and creators that try to take their shot at revitalizing those franchises. But I think that there is something to pulp as a format. Like, it's not comics, but it's not just prose. It's somewhere in between. And I think that there's fertile ground in that medium for new characters, new worlds, and especially if you can preserve the feeling and intent behind the pulps. The idea of like, this is just supposed to be like quick and dirty entertainment that's like consumable, disposable, but yet sticks in your brain because of all these crazy things that you can't just believe that you read.
Yeah. So do you see anybody else sort of would you say part of a pulp revitalizer movement, or is it pretty or it's just individuals every now and again?
I'd love to be a part of that rat pack. I don't know. Like, I think that the more of us that try this, like I mentioned earlier, like Red, Razor Fist, like they definitely dip their toes in and have found, varying degrees of success. I think if a good handful more of us can try doing this and pull it off, sure, like little by little, it could become this micro scene within the independent boom.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it would be interesting to see if, if different creators could sort of get together on like a pseudo publication, even if it's not, a physical magazine.
Mm-hmm.
If it were sort of like one place that people could go and you could see a bunch of different authors together, maybe even, online somewhere where every, I don't know, month or whatever, you would have like stories from 2-3 people.
Right.
Yeah,
I mean, and like then we would basically be doing pulp in its fullest form. It would be these anthology magazines put out, well, in modern day it would probably be monthly. Like, I don't think the average modern creator could handle a weekly schedule, let alone like producing the illustrations on a weekly basis.
I mean, unless you had like several people working, so like, first of the month is yours and next is the next guy or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, like, that's a great idea, and I'd love to see something like that, like just a full-on traditional pulp revival where you've got these, digital PDFs of like 2 to 3 stories every month. And yeah, man, I don't know, fingers crossed. Like, I love the format. I think I think there's something cool about getting this like incredibly detailed atmospheric illustration work next to just writing like Dashiell Hammett type stuff, like
Mhm.
writing that just chews up all the scenery around it. Like
Yeah, yeah.
I dig playing around with that stuff.
Yeah, and I definitely think that there's a need for new stuff. One of the examples that we can look at is actually Disney.
Hmm.
It's not a pulp, but do kids today have any real connection to Mickey, Minnie, and Goofy? Not really, because they went basically from the 70s until I think they have a cartoon with them now in the last couple of years, but they
Yeah.
went, 30, maybe 40 years with not really using those characters. So what would be the emotional attachment? They're none. Kids like Buzz Lightyear. They like, Lightning McQueen, The Incredibles. They like the more modern stuff. So I think just through the abandonment, um, not that Mickey is useless, but kids know them because their parents want to take them to Disney World
Right.
because they love the stories.
Yeah, and like I think you're right. I think kids, if they're into those characters at all, they're into them conceptually.
Mhm.
Like as a brand, like
Yeah,
you see Mickey and you're like, oh, that's Disney, or that's Mickey, but the kid doesn't necessarily go, I want to read a Mickey Mouse comic or watch a Mickey Mouse cartoon.
yeah. And, at least from the MCU, it looks like that's exactly where we're heading with the Marvel characters. I think DC hasn't really been able to pull that out
Right.
nearly as well, except maybe with Batman. But,
Right.
it seems like that's the future of what a lot of us who grew up in the 70s and 80s and 90s,
Hmm.
what we knew. So, I mean, it seems to me that now is the best time for new stuff. And I have a feeling that there's going to be a reaction to a lot of the modern media, and I'm not even talking about like TV and stuff, but more like TikTok. And you've got these short 9-second videos that are just eye candy.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
I think that I'm not going to say it's the whole culture, but I think there's going to be a significant backlash to that where people want deeper stuff. I think you see that with like YouTube video, like a Joe Rogan podcast. Like people are listening to 3 or 4 hours of
Right.
somebody talking about stuff. I think it's going to be the same thing in entertainment, and to me, that's kind of where the pulps have their chance.
Hmm.
Even if you only get like 5% of the population, that's huge. That's a huge amount of people spending money on good entertainment.
Yeah, and like I think there's room for all of that stuff to exist all
Mhm.
at the same time. I mean,
Oh,
it's like there's this quote from Grant Morrison that I always go back to. He's like he was asked, this was maybe 10, 15 years ago. Like he was asked why he works on mainstream characters like superhero stuff, but also does like his independent weird stuff.
yeah. Mhm.
And he was like, sometimes you want like a $75 steak and sometimes you want a Whopper. Like,
Yeah.
and I think that applies to the audience too. Like I think sometimes with the audience, they just want to scroll through TikTok for 45 minutes and just get like a bunch of dopamine hits. But then when they're working or driving or whatever, they want to listen to Joe Rogan for 3 hours.
Yeah. Yeah. And I don't know. To me, it seems like the pulp thing is an interesting idea. I have no idea how to make it work, or I'd be making tons of money on it. But
You and me both, man.
it does seem like this is an underrepresented space
Yeah.
in the entertainment industry, and it seems like there should be opportunities there.
It I mean, again, that's my hope. Like uh, with every project, I try to stay humble, and I'm grateful for every single backer. And it's like, look, we're coming up to the end of our first 30. We can extend another 30 after that, and I'll certainly do so. I'm confident that within the 30 to 60 day window, we'll hit funding. And as long as that's the case, and as long as when our readers get the books, they're happy with it and they're willing to come back for a second volume, I'm happy to keep producing these once a year, in between like our bigger projects, coming up in late April, we've got The Gods Fear Me 2, and then late July, we're going to be launching The Red Key. So, my entire thinking behind Longshadow and like this pulp revival was like, I can get this to readers way faster than I can those bigger projects that are going to take upwards of a year. So here's some, again, quick disposable entertainment to keep you reading while you wait on the larger stuff from us.
Yeah, that's an interesting plan. So do you think sorry, I'll get back to this in a second.
No problem.
My streaming show is very visual. I show off a lot of charts and tables and so forth from D&D books, but I was shocked by the number of people who say they just listen to my streams rather than watch.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, and sometimes it's the same with me. Like, be it like Bancroft's show or whatever, like there are times where like I'm out on like a diaper run or picking up dinner and he'll be live and I'll just pump my phone through my car speakers and I'm not really watching, I'm just listening.
Yeah, it's interesting to see how things evolve like that, because I think 3 years ago no one would say that would happen.
Right. Right. 3 years ago it seemed like whatever the thing was, that's what you were doing. Like if you were going to like, again, like watch Rogan, you would sit there and watch Rogan. And now it's just this, it's kind of become this like accepted part of our lives where it's like, oh, I just have that on in the background. Like the way our parents would just have the news playing in the background on TV without really watching it.
So you mentioned The Gods Fear Me 2.
Yep.
The Red Key. So how many projects would you like to be putting out a year when you get sort of in that groove?
Sure. Again, like if the audience is willing to trust us and sustain us, I'd like to get to the point where we're doing about 4 releases a year, so quarterly. Especially because at this point I've got various artists that I need to keep fed. So, I like to keep my artists working. I like to, reward their dedication to working with us. But as it is right now, we do about 2, and, Longshadow is technically going to be 3. So we do 2 to 3 projects a year.
Okay. So I think now is probably a good time to wrap it up because your other students coming on soon. Any final notes? Longshadow is on Indiegogo. Let's see. It's 17 days left right now. Yeah. But what else should people know about
it? So, like in addition to a 112-page semi-illustrated novel for $20, if you go with the swag bag or upgrade, as an add-on the novella, you're adding another 32 pages worth of content for only an additional $10. And in terms of stretch goals, our main stretch goal right now is if we can hit funding and if we can double funding. So if we can get to 8K, I'm going to be producing a world guide to Longshadow done in the style of old D&D monster manuals. Nice. And that's going to be chock full of art from some of your favorite Comicsgate and independent creators out there. We've got Donald DeLay, Stefani Renee, Selena Hernandez, my wife. Narwhal's going to be doing a piece. Like, it's a whole bunch of great artists lined up if we can hit that goal.
Very cool. All right. Well, Mike Murphy, thank you very much for coming on.
Thanks for having me on.
Where are you heading to next?
I'm going to be hanging out with Clint, Sweetcast.
Oh, nice. Yes, everyone, go over, check out Clint's channel tonight. Tomorrow, I will be on the Dungeon Delvers show. We're playing Gamma World, I believe. So he probably starts streaming about 8:30 Eastern. The Gamma World game should pick up about 9:30 Eastern for anyone who's interested.
Mm-hmm. Nice.
All right. So thanks a lot for coming, and hope to have you back in the future.
Yeah, I'd love to, man. Enjoyed hanging out. Thanks for having me on.
All right. Good night, everyone.
Later.